Hello, NDC. Welcome, everybody, to, so I love the thing, like, half of you live here, and I don't, but I can welcome you to Oslo, and that's just fine, right? So if you enjoyed those little opening reels, I got one thing to plug before we get into the serious business of free software. Those are all my band, Linebreakers, and we are playing the NDC party here Thursday, and then on Friday we're going to be at Brugata, just around the back. Big free after party with beer and nerdy comedy rock music, and you are all invited, and it will be awesome to see you there. And now, let's talk about free software. Now, there's an emotional cycle that I'm sure a lot of you folks in this room can relate to. And it starts like this. It starts with shiny. It starts with desire. There is a new thing that you have seen, and you need it. And yesterday you didn't know it exists. But now you must have it in your life or you will never be happy. And it might be a phone or a laptop or a gadget or a plugin or any one of these things. You're like, I need it, I need it, I need it. And then you get it. And you open it, and you configure it, and you install it, and you're thinking, I can't wait to see what this thing can do. And then there's doubt. There's that moment where you're like, hey, I got this amazing smartwatch, and I'm sure that the website said that it could play MP3s, but the only option here is to add a Deezer subscription, whatever that is. You've got that amazing new CRM package that everyone says is brilliant. And yes, the sales rep said, absolutely, you can deploy your custom workflows from GitHub. But there's no GitHub plugin. All there is a button to upload some XML from your desktop. And that's the point where you realize that this gadget, this system, it has the capability to do what you want. It's got all the right bits. They're just not quite set up properly. You need to tweak it. You need to hack it. You need to make this thing work the way you want it to. Now, for me, this is one of the defining characteristics of a true hacker. All you folks out there who've got your IDE set up just the way you like it, with your colors and your background and your plugins, your fonts, your everything. You know, the kind of people, if something doesn't work the way they want it, they don't send it back, they don't complain. You just roll up your sleeves, you get to work. You're like, let's make this into the thing that I want. And to that kind of hacker, the worst thing you can do is say no. You can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. We are not going to let you do that. Not for a technical reason, just because we said no. In 1980, Xerox donated a laser printer to the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In 1980, we were about 2 years away from general AI. And we've been 2 years away from general AI ever since, and we're about 2 years away from general AI. Now, Xerox and MIT, they're both really, really big names in the history of information technology. Xerox invented loads of amazing things. They invented mice, they invented Windows, they invented all this great stuff, and they completely failed to sell any of it because they were terrified of jeopardizing their photocopier business, which is why Xerox still make photocopiers. MIT, they invented functional programming. They invented passwords. They invented Ethernet. They invented email. They invented the Roomba. They invented blockchain. And maybe they also invented free software. You see, the laser printer had a problem. It was, now just checking, you folks, you do know what a photocopier is, right? I'm aware there's a generation gap in the audience, but you know the thing where you're making some copies and it jams, and you open up the door and the paper is all kind of crumpled up, and so you kind of tease it out like you're persuading the dog to let go of it, and then you close the door, and off you go, and it keeps making your copies. Now, when a photocopier jams, you're stood right there, because you're making your copies, and it jams, and you're like, and you fix it and get it going again, get your copies and go. But a laser printer, that's on the other side of the room, maybe the other side of the building. So you send your print, and you go, yep, I'll pick that up in a minute. And then you go to get a cup of coffee, and you get to the printer, you're like, oh, it's jammed. And you're like, it's been jammed all morning. It's been jammed since 10 o'clock. My job is number 17, and the queue hasn't moved for 3 hours. So you unjam it, and you fix it, and you put it back together, and you get another cup of coffee. Now, one of the people working at MIT in 1980 was this guy, Richard Stallman. And a lot of people have opinions about RMS, Richard Stallman, but I don't think you can talk about the history of free software without acknowledging the pivotal role that he has played in it. Now, his idea was this is a network printer. It knows when it's jammed. Why don't we just modify the software so that if it jams, it'll tell everyone on the network, hey, someone come and unjam the printer? Seems like a good solution, right? So he went to Xerox and he said, can I have the source code for the printer? Xerox said, no. We're not going to give that to you. The printer was free. Go away. We're not sharing source with you. Now, there are two versions of this story. There is the interpretation that says this incident galvanized Richard Stallman into spending the rest of his life committed to the idea of free and open software. There is an interpretation that says it pissed him off so much he's still angry about it 40 years later. I think both interpretations are kind of true. But, you know, this incident, he's spoken several times about the MIT laser printer and how that inspired his dedication to the cause of free software. Now, when talking about free software, we need to understand what free means. Because historically, there have been two kinds of free that people talk about. There is free as in free beer, and there is free as in free speech. And let's talk about free beer for a second, because beer is a great example of a certain kind of freedom. Anyone want a beer? Yeah, I mean, yeah, because this is Norway, right? Free beer is a signal. If I give you a beer, yeah, you have a beer now. Brilliant, excellent, and you didn't pay any money for it. Big deal. Now, what can you do with that beer? Well, you can drink it. Well, maybe you can drink it. Maybe you can't drink it because you're taking medication. Maybe you can't drink it because you're driving. Maybe you can't drink it for religious reasons. Maybe you can't drink it because you're 12. So now you have a beer you can't drink. Could you keep it? Nah, not really. Beer doesn't last very long and once it's in the mug. Can you sell it? What happens if you try and sell beer without a license? Yeah, it's free. It's free as in it didn't cost you any money, but you don't have any freedom. You can drink it or you can throw it away. That's really the only thing you can do with it. And the world is full of software that is free because we don't pay money for it. But any of you folks, you know, Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, Gmail, Google Drive, all these things, they don't cost money, but they don't give you any freedom at all. You are completely restricted in what you can do with those applications. Now, let me ask you what might sound like a weird question. Anyone in here, raise your hand if you own second-hand software. I mean, software is valuable, right? And there might be a couple of people who've got like an old copy of Windows 95 they bought on eBay or something. Second-hand software today is a curiosity. It's museum pieces and people collecting boxes and stuff. Because we don't really own software anymore. So the idea of buying it and then when you finished it, you sell it, it doesn't make any sense. Valve actually had a thing last week where they said legally, no, if you die, you cannot leave your Steam library in your will. You can't pass it on to someone else after your death. They said, you know, you spent all this money, thousands of games, you don't own them. They're not yours and you can't control what happens to them after you die. But it hasn't always been like this. When I was a kid, a lot of computer software came in cartridges. Any Sonic Hedgehog fans out there in the house today? And the software was so inextricably linked to the packaging that you could actually treat the game as a commodity. You could buy it, you could play it, and when you finished it, you could sell it. You could loan it to your friends. You could rent it out. You could go to a video store, and you could rent Sonic Hedgehog for the weekend, try and finish it, and then get it back on Monday. Now, when I was a kid at school in the UK, late 80s, early 90s, there were two kinds of kids in my school. There were the console kids and the computer kids. And the console kids, they had short hair, shaved heads, they had skateboards. They were always in trouble for setting stuff on fire. The computer kids had long hair and mountain bikes, and we also set stuff on fire, but we were smart enough not to get caught. And if we wanted to play computer games, we had a choice. We could buy them. We could go down to a store and we could buy X-Wing, or we could buy Dungeons & Dragons, Eye of the Beholder, or Monkey Island. These cost about £25. Now, to put that in perspective, I'm 12 years old. That's the same as 25 Big Macs or a new pair of jeans. You know, it's a substantial investment for a teenager whose only income is their allowance. Or we could pirate them. It says it right there on the copy protection, dial a pirate. Hey, Steve, have you got the new Monkey Island game? Now, the computer game companies, they tried really hard to stop us copying games. But there is no copy protection system that is smarter than a really bored teenager with lots of time and no money. We figured out how to make the decoder rings work. We figured out how to copy the hidden sectors on the drives from one thing to another. Now, piracy, if you made 100 copies of Monkey Island and you sold them at a market, maybe the police would get involved. But kids swapping games in the playground, we knew it was illegal, we just didn't care. But there was a third option. In the classified adverts at the back of the magazines, there were companies that sold free software. You'd send them a couple of dollars or a couple of pounds, and they'd send you a disk of free software. Now, a lot of this was something called shareware. And the idea with shareware, sometimes they'd say, here's the full program, I made it for fun, but if you like it, send me a check, send me some money. Some of them were like, I don't actually want your money, but send me a postcard, because it's nice to feel the love. Some of it was cut down restrictions. Some software was literally in the public domain. The people who created it, not only had they said, no copyright, it's just out there, they took their contact details off. You couldn't pay them for it even if you wanted to. You had no way of reaching them. But the most successful shareware model, the one that I think really kind of turned the tide on this chapter of free software distribution, was pioneered by this guy. This is Scott Miller. He founded Apogee Software, and he had written a game called Kingdom of Kroz for the IBM PC, and this game was too big to fit on one disk. So he had an idea. He's like, I'm going to put episode 1 on a disk, and that one's the one you can copy, and you can sell, and you can download it from your bulletin board, and it's free. And when you got to the end, a little screen popped up saying, hey, if you enjoyed that, send a check to this mailing address, which was his parents' house, and I'll send you episodes 2 and 3. Kingdom of Kroz made $100,000 in the late 1980s. Big deal. A couple of years later, Scott Miller gets a copy of this. Dangerous Dave, written by a company called SoftDisk, a developer called John Romero. Now, John Romero and his colleagues John Carmack and Tom Hall, they had a game development group called Ideas from the Deep. And Ideas from the Deep became id, and id, or became ID, and then ID became id. And John Carmack, one of the best graphics programmers in history, he was kind of the first person who figured out how to do smooth scrolling graphics on an IBM PC. And so they stayed up all weekend, and they ported Super Mario to the PC. And they sent a copy to Nintendo and said, are you interested in this? And Nintendo said, this is brilliant, bury it. We never, ever want to see Nintendo games, because Nintendo wanted to sell consoles and they wanted to sell cartridges. They didn't want kids swapping copies of Super Mario in the schoolyard, right? And so Scott Miller from Apogee, he gets hold of this. He gets in touch with John Romero, John Carmack, and he says, look, this technology is amazing. How about you make an original game, and we'll put it out on my Apogee shareware label, and episode 1 will be free, and then we'll sell episodes 2 and 3. And that game was Commander Keen, Invasion of the Vorticons, which is an 8-year-old boy genius who has to reassemble his spacecraft using his football helmet and his pogo stick. I loved this game, and I was not the only one. This game made so much money. It made something like $100,000 in 3 weeks. It made so much money that they all quit their jobs, they went into game development full-time, and created some of the most influential games in the history of PC gaming. In 1992, Wolfenstein 3D was the first-person shooter, like the first person where you could actually run around corners and this kind of thing. A couple of years later, Doom came out. Doom crashed every college network in America because it had multiplayer network deathmatch. And nobody had done that before, and it was awesome. And then a couple of years after that, in 1996, Quake. Quake was the first completely 3D shooter. Quake was one of the first games that supported 3D accelerator cards. My friends and I stayed up playing Quake for like upwards of 30 straight hours without sleeping or anything. These were some seriously excellent games, but each of them also represented a paradigm shift in the way software was distributed. I got Wolfenstein free on the cover of PC Format magazine. I copied Doom off a friend of mine at school, and I downloaded Quake from the id Software website in 1997, because this is the point in history where a lot of people, including me, were getting a modem, and we're getting online, we're getting email, we're getting access to the internet, the web is taking off, the dot-com boom is coming. And as we all rush online and go, yeah, this is awesome, we encountered a community of people who had been online for a lot longer than any of us had. And they had some ideas of their own about free software that did not have anything to do with coming free on the cover of a magazine. To them, software freedom was about the 4 essential freedoms. Freedom 0, the freedom to run the program however you want for any purpose. The freedom to study how the program works and modify it to do what you want. So it goes without saying, you need the source code. The freedom to distribute copies, and the freedom to share your own modifications. Now, these 4 principles, these are the underlying ethos of something called the GNU project. This was set up by, there you go, get a picture of the freedoms. Go on, it's fine, it's cool. These were the fundamental principles behind the founding of something called the GNU project. Set up by Richard Stallman in the early 1980s with the explicit objective of building a completely free, open operating system. By 1991, they had most of it. They just didn't have a kernel. This is a bit like saying, yeah, I've almost built a car. I got wheels, I got a steering wheel, I got the leather seats, and I got the stereo and the windscreen. Just having a bit of trouble with the engine, you know? And perhaps more significantly, along the way, they had created something called the GNU General Public License. This was in theory, a legally binding document that permitted and enforced the distribution of free software. Then 1991, this guy, Linus Torvalds, he's an undergraduate student at the University of Helsinki, and he says, hey everyone, I'm doing a free operating system. It's just a hobby. It won't be big and professional like GNU for 386 clones. And most significantly, he published his Linux kernel under the GPL. A couple of months later, the system became self-hosting. You could use a GNU Linux computer to work on GNU Linux and build your own tools. And for the first time, we had a completely free operating system whose freedom was enshrined in a legal document. Now, it's probably a good point to ask why. You know, why did all of these people decide to put their code out there for free? Now, I think Linus Torvalds, if you'd gone to him in 1991 and said, you know your little hobby project, you know one day that's going to run half the internet and 8 billion Android phones. He would have had no clue. I think he was doing it for fun. He was really enjoyed the craft of programming and the intellectual challenge of building his own kernel, and he wanted to share his work and show everyone what he did. I'm pretty sure the folks at id Software, I was at We Are Developers in Berlin last year. John Romero was one of the speakers there. That guy still loves gaming. Like, he made so much money that he went out and he bought a Ferrari and then he gave it away in a competition, and he still writes code every day because he loves programming. And I'm pretty sure the folks at id Software, they just wrote the games that they wanted to play, and shareware was a really good way of making enough money that they could spend more time writing games and playing games and improving games and doing all that kind of stuff. But for Stallman and the GNU project, I think software to them was the executable expression of their ideology. They wrote free software because they believed free software was going to make the world a better place. Now, you'll also notice we're about 20 minutes into this session now. I haven't mentioned the words open source yet. And that's because at this point in history, the late 1990s, nobody had mentioned the words open source yet. That phrase did not exist. But the late 90s was a really interesting period for software. The kind of desktop empire was just beginning to crumble around the edges. Lots of companies were like, the web. We need to do web. Can you do web? And they would hire webmaster. That was my job for a while. And webmaster had nothing to do with corporate IT. You got sat in a corner by yourself to do your own thing. And they needed software. They needed internet server-capable applications and servers and platforms. And if any of you folks ever tried running a website on Windows 95, that was some bad business. That was not a good way to do it. And companies saw an opportunity. You know, there's all these potential customers out there. They need enterprise-grade server-quality operating systems. Those are available for free on the internet for no money if you know how to download them and compile them and install them and configure them and set them up. And a lot of companies and clients, they didn't want to do that. They just we want to give you money, and we want to get software with a help desk number on the back, and if it doesn't work, we'll phone you and you can help us set it up. And so companies like Red Hat saw this opportunity, and they sprang in and went, we can do that. We'll download all the packages, we'll compile them, we'll make sure they work, we'll put them on a CD-ROM and put them in a box, and we'll sell it. And we'll sell you free software for only $80. And a lot of companies went, what do you mean free software for $80? What? And this word free was a problem. It was a real kind of barrier to entry for commercializing what would become known as open source. Now, the person who actually coined that phrase was this lady, Christine Peterson. And she was involved in a lot of meetings around 97, 98 with a lot of the other folks who were very prominent in this scene. And as she says it herself, those new to the term free software assume it's referring to price. And old-timers must then launch into an explanation, usually given as follows: we mean free as in freedom, not free as in beer. And at this point, a discussion about software has turned into one about the price of an alcoholic beverage. This is how it plays out every time. And she said, you know, between meetings, I was still focused on the need for a better name. I came up with the term open source software. And this kind of stuck. A week later, Eric Raymond and Bruce Perens, they created opensource.org. The first kind of flagship presence on the internet for this term open source and this idea. A couple of months later, Tim O'Reilly was organizing a big free software convention, which became known as the Open Source Software Convention. The name stuck and a new movement had kicked in. And ostensibly, it was about getting away from this word free, but it was also about addressing something that was perceived as a growing problem for the commercialization of free and open source software. The GPL, the GNU General Public License, is sometimes referred to as a viral license because of this clause: you may not impose any further restrictions on the recipient's exercise of the rights granted herein. You cannot take GPL software and make it closed. And the mechanism that they use to do this is interesting because it operates on copyright. If any of you folks in here has contributed code to .NET, you'll have signed a license agreement which transfers your copyright and your ownership to the .NET Foundation. If you've contributed to React, you'll have signed an agreement that says that Meta owns that contribution. If you've contributed code to Linux or to any of the GNU tools, that code is still yours. If you have one line of code in the Linux kernel, that line of code is your line of code. You are the author. That means you wrote the Linux kernel, as far as the law is concerned, and you are allowing people to use your work, which is copyrighted, under the conditions of a license. And if they violate that license, you can sue them. Now, this was purely hypothetical for a long while, until about early 2000s, 2002. This thing is the Linksys WRT54G. It was a really popular home broadband router. It's got a Wi-Fi chip, it's got 4 network ports, it cost about $100, $120. They sold 250,000 of these things in the space of 3 months. And then a guy called Andrew Viklas, who, if any of you knows the company PagerDuty, Andrew went on to found PagerDuty after this, but he was on the Linux kernel mailing list. And he pulled down the firmware for the Linksys router, he opened up the binary file, and he went, there's a Linux or a GNU Linux operating system in this thing. There's a Linux kernel, there's all this networking code, that is GPL code, and I don't see the source anywhere. They are not respecting our 4 essential freedoms. And so he got in touch with the Free Software Foundation, and he said, I think we might be onto something here. Now, the reason this was interesting is that this Linksys router had a bunch of Broadcom wireless networking chips in it. And this is the day when Wi-Fi didn't work on Linux. It was so difficult getting anything to connect. And so whoever built this, they'd taken the Linux kernel and they'd added support for all these Wi-Fi chips. And the community really wanted those drivers. And so the Free Software Foundation, now this is the bit where I can't quite make the pieces add up. In 2003, hello. That's fun. All right, so in 2003, intermittently flickering. Let's see, is it just that slide it doesn't like? Yeah. Look at that, the projector doesn't work with Slashdot. So I'm going to tell you, that's a story from Slashdot from 2003 about D-Link releasing, or the thingy, Linksys releasing the source code for that router. Now, Linksys had been acquired by Cisco while all this was going on. Cisco accidentally bought a lawsuit and went, crap, what did we do? And I went, all right. Now, 5 years later, 2008, the Free Software Foundation sues Cisco over the open source code. Now, I don't know what happened in the intervening 5 years. I suspect what happened is that Cisco went, look, just put the source code on an FTP server and they'll go away and stop hassling us. And the Free Software Foundation went, if we can get this to court and we can get a judge to rule on it, we can have a precedent that the GPL is legally binding in the United States, so we're not going to let this one go without a fight. It bounced backwards and forwards until in 2009, the case was settled out of court. Now, this means Cisco sat down with a bunch of their lawyers, and the lawyers went, don't take this one to court. Don't try and fight this. You might lose, and that wouldn't be a good look. And so Cisco made a big donation to the Free Software Foundation. They established a compliance director. They published all the source code, agreed to do that going forward. The only time, as far as I've been able to find, that the GPL ever actually made it to court was in Germany. In 2006, there's a guy called Harald Welter who founded a website called gplviolations.org, and he took D-Link to court. And he sued them, saying, I wrote code that's in the Linux kernel. D-Link has got a network-attached storage device that runs the GNU Linux operating system. They've stole my code. They didn't follow the rules. I want to take them to court. They went all the way to the Frankfurt District Court, and a judge said, yes, they broke the rules. Yes, the GPL is legally binding in Germany. Now, I don't know what happened after that, because I don't think D-Link got shut down or anything based on that. But that established, a legal precedent that at least in Germany, the GPL is a legally binding document. Now, in the late 90s, this is all hypothetical. None of this has happened yet. But it's pretty obvious if you read the licenses that it is going to. And in 2001, Steve Ballmer made this famous observation. that Linux is a cancer that attaches itself in an intellectual property sense to everything it touches. That's the way the license works. Now, Steve is wrong about Linux, he's wrong about the license, he's also wrong about cancer. That is not how any of these things work on any level, but it didn't matter. It's the CEO of Microsoft saying Linux is a cancer. This gets picked up by all kinds of things. Now, Microsoft in the late 1990s, they dominated business desktop computing. Their bread and butter was Windows and Microsoft Office and things like Exchange and Outlook, and they were terrified of anything that might represent a threat to that dominance. They have done a dramatic about-face in the intervening 25 years, and the reason for that is cloud, because cloud changed everything. Cloud unlocked a new way of charging people for software. Yeah, have the software, have the source, we don't care. You're going to give us money every time you run it, and we are going to make a fortune on this thing. Now, cloud works because it enabled economies of scale we'd never seen before. When I was a webmaster, one of the things I used to do was build servers. You come to me like, hey, we need a web server. Yeah, I could do that. I'd get it out of the box, and I put on Apache and Linux and MySQL and PHP and all the other bits. It'd take about a day, £1,000 for the hardware and the setup, and then a couple of £100 a month maintenance. If I had 50 people all phone me in the morning going, hey, can I have a web server by lunchtime? Yeah, not a chance. I've just turned down 50 grand in income because it doesn't scale. So forget about building servers. Let's start building data centers. Let's start automating data centers and shipping container-sized deployable units of computing. And every single step, operating system, networking, we script, we configure all of that, and we get to a point where 50 people come to us and say, hey, can we have a MySQL database? We're like, yeah, just click the button. Boom, bang, bang, bang. And next thing you know, we are making $1 million a month from running MySQL, which is free software, in the cloud. Let me tell you folks the story of Sammy the squirrel. Sammy lives in the forest with all the other happy little woodland animals, and they frolic about, and they look for acorns, and they splash around in the stream. And on Sunday mornings, they go to the glade with the old tree stump, and they do woodland show and tell, and they all show each other what they've been working on. And Sammy likes to make computer games. And Sammy has written Acorn Adventure, which is lovely. You run around and you gather acorns for the winter and frolic with all the other animals. And the next week, the woodland animals gather for show and tell, and they notice that Jeff the raccoon is there. And Jeff has brought an arcade cabinet with real buttons and a screen and everything, and a little slot where you can put in 20 cents to have a go on the game. And this is amazing. Sammy's like, look at that, it's my game. It's running in a real arcade cabinet. This is awesome. And the game is brilliant, and the animals are lining up to play it, and they're putting coins into this, and the little animals are pestering their parents. Dad, can I have some more money so I can have another go on the game? And everyone's really excited about this, and the next week, Jeff turns up in a brand new pickup truck with 2 arcade machines. And some of the animals are starting to get a bit upset because the game is hard. They're like, level 2 is too difficult. This owl you've got to finish, defeat to get to the end of the level. We really don't like that. Also, the graphics, they could be better. And the music isn't really that good. Can you fix the music? And Sammy is saying, you can fix it. It's free software. You can send me a patch. But of course, to them, it's not free because they've been paying 20 cents every time they have a go. They think they're paying customers. They get a little bit upset about this. The next week, Jeff turns up in a solid gold helicopter. But that doesn't matter. Sammy has been hard at work. Sammy has built Acorn Adventure 2. The owl is easier to defeat. The graphics are better. The music is better. The gameplay is better. Everything is improved. And Sammy has put a little clause in the license that says, if you want to take this and play it at home, that's fine. If you want to use this to learn about software, that's fine. If you want to run this on your pay-to-play arcade cabinet machine, you need to give me 20% of the proceeds. Oh boy, the woodland folk did not like that. Not one bit. Sammy's a traitor. Sammy's done a rug pull. Sammy has betrayed the principles of free software. One of them gets so angry, they take the source code for Acorn Adventure 1 and they fork it and they call it Open D's Nuts. Now, how did we get here? Or maybe that's not what happened. Maybe around the time that all of the animals are getting angry about the graphics and the gameplay, Wilbur shows up. Wilbur the Weasel. And Wilbur says, hey, looks like you're having some trouble with your game there, friend. I can help you out with this, and contributes a couple of gameplay fixes, the odd bug fix. Wilbur is prolific. After a couple of weeks, Sammy's lost track of how much code Wilbur's contributed, but that's all right. Wilbur is adding features people want. Something everyone's been asking for is, hey, can we pay with a credit card so we don't have to keep bringing bags of 20-cent coins? So Wilbur adds credit card payment to Acorn Adventure. And then somebody notices that every time someone puts their MasterCard into Acorn Adventure, it's sending a copy of it to a server in Belarus. And they turn around, and at this point, Wilbur's not there anymore. And now you come to think of it, no one really knew who Wilbur was. No one's seen Wilbur around before. And all the other angry animals who were shouting at Sammy because the game wasn't good enough, they've mysteriously disappeared as well. Now, this is a situation that we are seeing unfold time and time and time again. We have trillion-dollar corporations out there who make a significant amount of revenue from providing access to free software. Now, the GNU folks, or the Free Software Foundation folks, they wised up to this possibility a long time ago. In 2002, they created a thing called the Affero GPL. Affero was the name of a company who were building web applications, who were very, very kind of keen on this idea of free and open software. And the Affero GPL, the GNU GPL, General Public License, that says if you distribute your software, you have to distribute source code. So if I give you a copy of my program, I have to give you the code as well. And if you give that copy to someone else, you have to give them code as well. But just interacting with it across the network doesn't constitute distribution. If I open my phone and I load up, I don't know, TikTok or whatever, they're not actually giving me a copy of TikTok. I'm just interacting with it. The Affero GPL says, well, actually, even if you're just interacting over a network, that constitutes distribution. You have to give your source code to anybody who has interacted with your application. Now, within the last couple of years, we've seen tools like Copilot and Bard and Grok and AI assistants and machine learning language models. More and more developers are using these tools to make them more productive. And these tools have been trained on publicly available source code, which I am absolutely certain includes code that was published under the Affero GPL. So if somebody at TikTok, Netflix, Warcraft, working on any of these platforms, they get a bit stuck one day, and they go onto Copilot, and they get a solution, and that solution happens to include some lines of code which are identical to software released under the Affero GPL. That code makes it into production, it goes live. From that point forward, legally, everybody who opens TikTok is entitled to a copy of TikTok's entire source code. If you accept that Copilot has copied the code. If you say Copilot just accidentally ended up at the same solution based on all of its training data, then that's a different set of circumstances. Now, I'm sure a lot of lawyers are going to get really, really rich figuring this one out over the next couple of years. For now, it's just this sort of weird hypothetical question, but I'm betting that, Stallman and the Free Software Foundation, their eyes are lighting up at the prospect of being able to take someone like TikTok to court and sue them and get them to publish their source under the Affero GPL. The thing is, most software these days is not published under the GPL or any variant of it. It's published under one of these, the permissive licenses. Now, I am not an intellectual property lawyer, I am not a software licensing expert, and I am not your software licensing expert. If you're going to make any important decisions based on any of the stuff in this talk, you need to hire somebody to tell you what applies to your business in your jurisdiction. But very broadly speaking, the way these kind of licenses work, so the MIT license, which is one of the most popular ones, it's short. This is the whole thing. And this basically boils down to, we own the software. Do anything you like. You can't remove the license, and you can't sue us if this software doesn't work. And most software published under permissive licenses, I mentioned earlier, it's governed by a thing called a contributor license agreement. If you want to contribute code to React or any of the Meta, Facebook open source projects, you've got to go in here and you've got to sign a thing saying, yeah, I understand this is my code and I'm giving it to you. And what this gives them the right to do, if Facebook turn around and they go, you know what? React ain't going to be free anymore. React 20 is going to cost $50,000. They are legally allowed to do that because even though you wrote that code, you have signed away your rights as the author by signing that contributor license agreement. You wrote it, but you don't own it. They own it. And they make it free because they choose to, probably because their lawyers and accountants have said, yeah, make it free, it looks good, and we might make more money if people think we're nice. If they decide to turn around and revoke that access, you have no right to complain about that because you have signed away your ownership of that property. So Why do we do this? Why do people do hard work in their own time and then sign a license agreement that conveys ownership of that work to somebody who isn't paying them? Well, in some cases, they do it because they are paying them. A significant amount of the .NET code base is written by people whose job is to write free software at Microsoft. They get a salary, they get money, they get corporate support, they get all the things, and Microsoft decides that their work will be published under the MIT license, which governs that. Sometimes they don't care. Sometimes it's just share code, have fun. That's it, the end. They don't care about profit. They don't care about outcome. There's a lot of folks out there who love writing software, and they're financially secure, and this is just a nice way of enjoying their weekends. They put stuff out there. Yeah, no big deal if we don't get paid for it. But a lot of folks, they have this idea, like, I'll write the code, and I'll publish the code, and everyone will see what a good programmer I am. They'll see the quality of my work, and then they'll buy a support contract, or I'll get consultancy gigs off the back of this, or maybe one of these companies will turn around and hire me. And this happens sometimes. There are lots of people who have made, financial success stories that started with them writing free software, but there's also a lot of Sammy Squirrel developers out there, sitting there wondering why they don't have enough acorns for the winter while Jeff flies around in his solid gold helicopter. Within the last couple of years, we've seen some very high-profile projects turn around and change their licensing. The most recent one was Redis. Redis is about 15 years old now, and until March this year, Redis was published under the Berkeley Systems Distribution License. It's a permissive license, like the MIT license. We own the software, do whatever you like with it, can't sue us if it doesn't work, and you can't change the license. Then, in March this year, they turned around and said, we're not doing that anymore. We're changing the licensing. And they went so far as to explicitly say that if your business is offering paid hosted Redis in the cloud, you are not allowed to do that without paying for a license for Redis. This upset a lot of people. Within a couple of days of the announcement, Microsoft had announced a project called Garnet, which is a C# re-implementation of the Redis protocol, so you can drop that as a replacement if you're on Azure. A project called Valkey. Valkey took the last BSD licensed copy of Redis and went, we're going to make a new project. It's basically take the same Redis code base, we're going to spin that out into something that is still going to be free, and you can still run in the cloud. Now, we've seen a couple of different things do this. Unity did this recently, Terraform did this recently, Docker did this recently. Sizable companies who are like, we are no longer comfortable with the economics of using permissive licensing for our software. So what's going to happen? What is going to happen to projects like Valkey and so Terraform, the group that spun that off called it Open Tofu? What's going to happen to those in a couple of years? Well, at the moment, we don't know. But this is not a new idea. Some of you may have heard of a project called Service Stack. Service Stack, about 10 years ago, I used Service Stack for everything. It was excellent. It's a framework and set of libraries for building APIs and message-driven applications on the .NET stack. And back in the days when .NET kind of sucked, Service Stack was one of the things that made it kind of not suck. It's really, really good. And 10 years ago, 2014, Demis Bellart, who was the creator and maintainer of Service Stack, changed the license, turned around and said, this can't be free anymore. If this is going to be a good product, people need to pay to use it. And the community kind of splintered. About a third of them went, yeah, all right, fair enough, this is pretty good, we're going to pay for it. Some of them, and this includes me, we couldn't win that argument. I went to my boss, I was like, that thing we're using to build APIs? Well, it was free, but now it's going to cost $1,000 per developer per year. And my boss said, what's an API? Is it worth $8,000 a year? I was like, not to this company right now. And so we switched. We switched to using something else for it. But a couple of people spun up an open source fork. They called it NService Kit. They took the last snapshot of the free code base and turned that into a different project. Now, I emailed Demis last month, and I basically said, look, I'm doing this talk in Oslo about open source and free software and everything. How's it going? How did it work out? And he got back to me, and he said a couple of things I thought were interesting. He said, I've been able to work full-time on Service Stack. So he used to work at Stack Exchange. That's the day job that he left to go and do this. Service Stack has greatly improved. It's much more capable than would have been possible as an open-source side project. He said, I was willing to take a pay cut to be able to work on my own project. I was pleasantly surprised when it ended up making more money than any job I had had prior. Service Stack has allowed our family to be financially independent and given me the freedom to work on whichever features I want. Financial independence, work on whatever features you want. Hands up if that sounds like a pretty good way to live your life, yeah? We can get behind that. Now, Service Stack has gone from strength to strength. The license shift was version 4. That was 10 years ago. Service Stack has just shipped version 8. They've got plugins for all kinds of things. They've got Angular components. They've got message passing. This is a really solid, mature, and from what Demis is saying, a financially sustainable library now, thanks to pulling the rug and saying it's not free anymore. If you're using this and you're using it in a corporate environment, you're going to have to pay us for it. So what happened to NService Kit? Well, there was about a year of lots of very enthusiastic, software should be free, let's do this, they can't do this to us. Here is the GitHub repository for NService Kit. The last commit on that was 9 years ago. It's kind of fallen by the wayside. No one is really using that very much anymore. Because what happens is when you fork one of these projects and set up a free version, give it a couple of years, and you have the same problems that caused them to do the thing they did in the first place. You have more users, which means you have more issues, which means you have more requests, more support, more overhead, more maintenance. And unless that translates into more resources that you can use to find hours in the day and smart people to fix those problems, it's not going to work. It's not going to scale. And Wilbur? Wilbur's not actually a weasel. Well, for all we know, Wilbur is actually a weasel. But this is the contributor dashboard for a project called XZ-utils. XZ-utils is part of the OpenSSH login system, which is used to get remote access to just about every Unix and Linux system on this planet. Now, this is the number of people who maintain this vital piece of internet infrastructure. The number one contributor is Laju, Lasse Collin, 1,945 commits over about a 20-year period. The number two contributor is someone called Jia Tan. We don't know who Jia Tan is. Jia Tan might actually be a weasel. Jia Tan might be a nation-state actor. Jia Tan might be an organized crime group. Jia Tan might be a 14-year-old kid in their mother's basement. We don't know. The third most active contributor to this vital piece of infinite infrastructure is the same Sam, who made 15 commits last year, and the fourth most active is Adrian N., who made 4 commits back in 2014. A tremendous amount of pressure and responsibility fell on one single individual to maintain a key piece of internet security infrastructure. Now, you look at this timeline here. Around this point, a lot of people on the XZ-utils mailing list start being very, very aggressive about the fact that it is taking so long to merge patches and accept contributions and fix bugs. And this is the point where Jia Tan shows up out of nowhere and says, hey, I can help. I can do this. Let me help out, and gradually begins to establish credibility within this development community to the point where they have commit access, the point where they can push production releases, they can modify the build process, to the point where they came this close to smuggling a backdoor into XZ-utils that we only found out about by mistake. A guy called Andreas Fraund, he's a Microsoft developer. He discovered this because he was doing some benchmark profiling, and so was trying to quieten down every process on his system to the point where nothing was using CPU apart from the thing he was looking at. And he noticed that the login daemon was using more cycles than it should. And he got curious, and he went sniffing, and he discovered an incredibly sophisticated supply chain attack that had smuggled a backdoor into the pre-release version of XZ-utils that was running on his machine. Now, the engineering that got this attack this close to going into the wild was unbelievably sophisticated, you know, concealing things, binaries that didn't match the signed source that they were supposed to have been built from. But the foothold that got it going in the first place was social engineering. And it was social engineering created by the fact that the project maintainer was being harassed. They were being put under a huge amount of pressure, which makes them vulnerable to manipulation. Now, I'm absolutely certain that given enough time, all of you folks in this room, you would find really interesting, important projects to work on, and you would do good work, and you would produce good software, and the world would be a better place. But that is not how the world works, because we don't have an infinite amount of time. Time is money. Capitalism runs on money. There is this pressure to get stuff done quickly, to not spend any money that you don't have to. And it is really difficult, if you have created something and shared it for free, to turn around afterwards and go, actually, it's not free anymore. I'm really sorry. It seemed like a good idea, but now I actually have bills to pay. And so we keep seeing this situation. Somebody creates something, they put it out in the world for free. They do this, out of benevolence or curiosity, or they just want to show people what they did, and then they turn around and go, actually, if you're using this to run your business, can you give us some money? And everyone gets very upset, and so you did a nice thing and you made it free, and now everybody hates you. Now, I'm going to say what is possibly the most important thing in this entire talk, and I want you all to remember this, and I want you to tweet this, and I want you to tell your friends this, and I want you to tattoo this on the inside of your eyes so that you see it every time you blink. People who share their source code do not owe you anything. If I give you the source to one of my projects, I've given you the source and the freedom to use it. You don't get an upgrade. You don't get support. You don't get bug fixes. You don't get maintenance. You don't get dibs on my email or my time or any of that kind of thing. If you need access to that ongoing, it is your responsibility to keep a copy of it somewhere, because I might not even have the source code online tomorrow. People who publish their code, they give you the code, they give you the freedom to use it. If you need support, pay for it. If you need maintenance, pay for it. If you need stable builds, set those things up yourselves. Get a support contract. Hire somebody to run this thing for you. Do not think that just because somebody has put something on the internet and shared it with the world, that means that they have entered into some kind of obligation to support it and run it and maintain it and upgrade it and give you the next version. You don't get any of that stuff. And the amazing thing is that the source code and the freedom to run it for whatever you want, there's people out there for whom that is not enough. I use Adobe Creative Cloud a lot. I use it for all my videos. I use it for Photoshop and illustration and design, all that kind of stuff. I don't have the source code to any of those applications. I will never have the source code to any of that. I pay $50 a month to run Creative Cloud. If Adobe turn around tomorrow and go, yeah, you know what, 500, I've got to choose. Am I going to go 500 or am I going to lose access to the last 10 years of my own work? If they turn around tomorrow and go, oops, we bankrupt now, sorry, no more authentication servers, that's it. Game over. No more Creative Cloud for anybody. If, Adobe turn around and I discover a bug in Photoshop or After Effects, which happens about once a month, I can't fix it. I can't find it. I can't send them a patch. I can't do anything about it except file a support request and wait a week for somebody to turn around and go, yeah, well, actually, nobody cares. Sorry. Maybe try turning it off and on again. This is the alternative, And there's people out there going, well, that's your own fault. That's your own fault for using proprietary software. You should be using open source software for everything. Open source software is great. It is nowhere close. If you go online and say, hey, what's an open source alternative to Adobe Premiere and After Effects? People say, oh, you should use Blender and the GIMP. No. Blender and the GIMP is a 1970s cop show that never got made. Now, I love the ethos behind the Free Software Foundation. I love that the GNU Linux operating system exists in the world, and it is out there, and it is powerful and mature and capable and free, and no one can ever take that away. But we have this huge gap. Because over here, we have the fundamentalist ideology of the GNU project and the Free Software Foundation. And over here, we have Adobe going $50 a month, and you're never getting the source code, not even over our dead bodies. And there's this gulf in the middle that we have been trying to figure out. And I think what we're seeing at the moment, the last couple of years, is the free money is gone. The economies are tanking all over the world. Interest rates are going up. When there was free money sloshing around, yeah, let's give code away for free. It's great. It's awesome. We can always get another job. Life has got harder for everybody. And whether you're a CTO sitting there, CEO, looking at the line must go up thing and thinking, how am I going to explain this to the shareholders? Or you're standing in a grocery store going, when did cheese get so expensive? Everyone is thinking, hang on, there's still all this money sloshing around. Maybe we should be getting our share. And on that note, I want to leave you today with something to go away and think about. Within my lifetime, music has seen a fundamental shift in the way that it is distributed. From buying vinyl, to buying cassettes, to buying compact discs, to Napster and illegal downloads, to legal paid MP3s from the iTunes store, to streaming. Streaming dominates music today. Most people who listen to music do it on something like Spotify. And you know why Spotify wins? Spotify wins because it's convenient. You don't own anything. $15 a month to Spotify for the last 5 years, and I own no music as a result of giving them all that money. But I don't care, because I can listen to whatever I want, whenever I want. I just go, yeah, Taylor Swift, new album, bang, go. Oh, yeah, that's awesome. Do you know why the cloud works? The cloud is convenience. The cloud is Spotify for corporate IT infrastructure. We want the new Taylor Swift album now, except it's not Tay, it's a 64-bit PostgreSQL cluster. Boom, click, MasterCard in, there you go, you've got the thing you want. When you've finished using your 64-core PostgreSQL cluster, you can't sell it. It's not how it works, you're renting it. You have to give it back when you're finished. You own nothing. But companies use cloud because convenience wins. Now, if you've ever tried to get money out of a big corporation, by asking them to sponsor your open source project or to buy a support contract or anything. It's impossible, right? Like, no, big companies, you cannot get close to their money. You cannot get them to open their wallets. It's impossible, even if you work there. I've been to bosses and been like, we should really donate to this project. And they're like, why? We've already got the thing. Why would we give them money for something we've already got? But let me ask you another question. Any folks out there who your company hosts on Azure or Google Cloud or Amazon Web Services, do you actually know what's on your bill at the end of the month? If we stick another $10 on there, would you notice? Another 20? Another 50? 500? You know, depends on the size of the company. Now, we're going to use Nuget as a worked example here because Nuget is an ecosystem I know very well, and I'm very familiar with a lot of the packages and the kind of people who create them on there. We're going to do an experiment. We are going to create Nuget Premium, and we're going to see how the numbers for that thing work out. Now, let's say you want to get a package from Nuget. You got a choice. You can download it. You can compile it yourself, get it from GitHub, compile it yourself, build it, run it, effort. You can use the free tier. Yeah, that's fine. That gets you 20 packages a day. If you're running a big corporation, you're running continuous delivery integration servers, you're going to burn through your 20 downloads a day pretty quick. And at that point, we're going to give you a choice. You can go back to GitHub and build it yourself. That's always going to be there. The source code is still free. You can add it to your cloud bill. Now, this is going to mean meetings. This is going to mean talking to GitHub and talking to Amazon and talking to Circle CI. But the best way to make a successful company is not to send lots of little invoices. It's to get people like Microsoft and GitHub on board and send them one invoice every month for $750,000. We can get that set up. That's beautiful. And we give them whatever metadata they need to pass that on to their own customers. So it shows up on your cloud bill, and that just gets paid because no one really knows what that stuff is for anyway. Or you can pay for it. Same way folks pay for Spotify. Now, let's crunch some numbers here. Nuget, they don't publish total download figures, but they do publish their 100 most popular packages with the downloads over the last 6 weeks. So we can take that, we can plot that on a graph, we can apply a trend line to that graph. Now, we're going to use something here. If any of you folks know what integral calculus is, that's what this is. If you don't, let's just pretend we did this by magic, all right? I want to know how many packages get downloaded from Nuget, and that means that we need to figure out what is the area underneath that curve. That'll give us the total number of package downloads, so we want to integrate that curve. Now, this number here, that is the total number of packages on Nuget, including the ones that haven't been updated, like NService Kit, in 9 years. I don't think we want to reward those people, because we want to incentivize active maintenance of open source projects. So I was like, well, how many packages are there on Nuget that have been updated within the last year? That number was hard to get. If you want to know how, there's a link at the end which links to the source code, which downloads the entire Nuget catalog, puts it into a SQL database, and crunches it. The number that I managed to come up with using that was 138,000. So that many actively maintained packages on Nuget right now. So we just need to do that integral. Now, I could do this when I was 16. I'm not 16 anymore. I've lost a lot of brain cells since then. Fortunately, we have Wolfram Alpha. So you can go over here, and we can say, I want the integral between 1 and 138,000 of 1 times 10 to the 8 over the minus 0.533, and we get that number, 53,767,000 Nuget downloads. Remember that next time someone on Hacker News says that .NET is dead and nobody uses it, right? That's like 8 downloads per human being on this planet every 6 weeks. Now, how many people use Nuget? This one I had to fudge. I couldn't get any accurate data on this from anywhere, so I made an estimate. I crunched the total number of downloads of the most popular package, which is newtonsoft.json. That gave me a sum, 142 million downloads in 6 weeks. And I looked at my own work that I've been doing for the last couple of months, and I assumed I'm average, because obviously I'm a very average person. 10 Newtonsoft JSONs per week for me, so I crunched that number in. 2,374,000 users. Let's do some Bart Simpson blackboard arithmetic. So we got that many downloads every 6 weeks. That's roughly that many downloads per month. We've knocked a little bit off there so that we can take some commission to run our own infrastructure. that many billion or million active users, set up a pricing plan. Half our users are free. Because half of Spotify's users are free, that seems like a good place to start. We got that many people on the $15 a month basic plan. We've got that many people paying $75 a month for indie. And we got a couple of big corporates paying $500 a month. That gives us this revenue pot, $43 million a month that we can distribute to the package authors who are creating the free software that makes our service function, which works out at $0.001 per download. Now, if any of you know how Spotify's business model works, one, you'll know Spotify are notoriously stingy and tight-fisted, and two, Spotify pay a lot more than that. But from where we are with open source, even Spotify would be a massive step in the right direction. Now, what this works out at, Automapper, Mock, you know, the really big, popular top 100 packages, they're talking about $13,000 a month. Now, we are not talking here about buying licenses. We're talking about a convenience fee for binary packages. This is just like a way of maybe moving the needle in the right direction in terms of our industry's attitude to paying for open source and getting paid for it. Middle of the road, projects like Image Sharp, bringing about $3,000 a month. Now, that's not quit your day job money in most places on this planet, but it is, hey, boss, I'm going to go 4 days a week for the next couple of months because I want to take some time to work on the new release. And way down in kind of the long tail, N-Audio, $120 a month. Now, N-Audio is not a massively popular package. It's an excellent package, but there's not a lot of folks doing big business with audio on .NET. So Mark Heath, who makes N-Audio, yeah, he's got a summer holiday or maybe a new developer laptop every couple of years. Now, you know, this is not a business plan. This is an experiment. This is, do these numbers come out in the right kind of ballpark? And I kind of think they do. But this is never going to happen, right? Because Nuget is not going to turn around, NPM, pip, Maven, none of these package repositories is going to turn around and make something paid, and people will recoil in horror at this. You know, the winning move in capitalism when you find a free resource, you don't reward it, you exploit it, because that's how line got to go up, and if line stopped going up and you have to explain it to the shareholders, things get uncomfortable. But the idea of paying for convenience has been established. The idea of selling free software has been around for as long as CD-ROMs have existed. That has been there the whole time. Now, if any of these platforms did turn around and go, you know what, the free lunch is finished, the Woodland folk are going to riot. But the last thing I want to leave you with, it doesn't have to be one we've already got. Something interesting is happening in our industry right now. If any of you has seen talks that Steve Sanderson has done at NDC within the last year or so, Steve is talking about WASI, the Web Assembly Systems Interface. This is a way of distributing packages that can talk to each other even if they were built with different languages. If I want to build an application, and there's a calculation engine here that was built in Haskell, and there's a view engine over here that was built in .NET, in C#, and there's maybe some kind of email rendering platform here that was built in Go, I can pull down those packages and I can combine them. And this means that within a year, maybe 2 years, we'll have a point where if you want to encode PNG images, there is one package that does that you can download. And it doesn't matter what you're using, Python, Go, JavaScript, Rust. That's the package you are going to use, which means there is going to be a marketplace. There is going to be a repository of WASI packages. And so before we all rush headlong into, yay, free, let's make all the WASI packages free, and then 2 years later everyone is burned out and exhausted, and Jeff is flying around in another solid gold helicopter, maybe WASI is a chance to do something new and to approach it differently. You know, open source is 25 years old. We've done free as in beer, and it's awesome. And there are people all over this planet who are running software they didn't have to pay for. Students, hobbyists, startups, curious people, tinkerers, free trials, experiments, all this stuff. It is fantastic, but if you're making $1 million a year off other people's free software, I think it's time we encourage people to give some of that stuff back. We've done free as in speech. And that's awesome. And we have this free enterprise-grade operating system out there that nobody can take away, supported by a growing body of legal precedent that says the GPL is binding and no one can take that freedom from us. But the freedom comes at a cost. You know, it is frightening how much of the internet relies on one person working evenings and weekends. And it is terrifying the abuse and hostility that those people encounter when they try and claw some of that back. So I want you to think about a third kind of freedom. I want you to think about waking up on a Saturday and going, I got a free weekend. I'm not going to get emails hassling me about stuff. I'm not going to get my boss WhatsApping me going, we think there might be a backdoor in our login system. I want you to think about waking up and going, you know what, I can relax. I'm financially secure. I can pay my rent. My projects are doing okay. No one is hassling me right now. I'm going to take off. I'm going to go out, drop away, get off the grid for a couple of days, and I'm not going to worry about what's waiting for me when I come back. Free beer and free speech are all very well, but a free weekend, I'd pay for that. Thank you. So folks, hit that URL, all the source, all the sources, all the calculations, all the calculus, all the source code, everything went into this talk is out there. And if you like that, come and chat to me. I'm around all week. I'd be really interested to hear perspectives on whether you think something like this might work and whether we could actually turn this into a thing. Thanks for coming, folks. Have an awesome couple of days. Enjoy the rest of NDC. I'll see you around.